Welcome everyone to the Light of Zion. The Light of Zion is God's written words. And the Light of Zion will continue to shine its light to guide and to lead the chosen ones of Israel until we arrive back to Zion, our homeland. Yes, the promised land. The light of Zion will continue to shine its light for the travelers of Israel who are sojourners among the nations. Shine your light, O Yahuwah. Let it lead us to your holy mountain. Shine your light, for your word is true. Shine your light, for your word is good for me. And with that, I say again, welcome to the Light of Zion. Welcome again, and thank you for joining me at the Light of Zion for another presentation. Today I'm coming to you with another presentation, and this is titled, This is It. This is Faith. This is our faith. Yes, this is our faith. Join me as we proceed and break down this presentation. Yahuwah spoke to our ancestors. Yahuwah is God to Israel, and he spoke to our ancestors. Yes, Yahuwah spoke to our ancestor Abraham and made a promise to him. Yahuwah spoke to our forefathers in the promised land that he gave to Israel to inherit. Yahuwah sent his prophets to declare his decisions and his judgment of what he is doing concerning his people, the people of Israel. In the book of Psalms, chapter 147, verse 19 to 20, there it is written, He, Yahuwah, declares his word to Jacob, his regulations and judgment to Israel. He has not done so with any other nation. They know nothing about his judgment. Praise Jah. Yes, thank Yah. So, thank God for only the chosen ones of Israel know and understand of the decisions and the judgments of our God. The people of other nations do not know or understand Yahuwah's judgment. And you can see this in the confusions, in their confused teaching of our God's word. You can see this in their false interpretations or erroneous interpretations of what God's word is saying. They will say, oh, this means this, and tomorrow they will change to mean the other thing. They are all trying to guess or figure out what is written. What is God doing? What is God saying? They know nothing about his decisions and judgment. Say, thank God. But Yahuwah reveals his decisions and judgment concerning his people of Israel to Jacob, to his chosen servants. So what is faith for the true Israelite descendants? What is faith to us? What is faith? In the book of Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1, there it is written, or the definition of faith is this. It says, faith is being convinced that you will receive what is promised by our God, which is supported by present and future manifestation. Yes, faith is being convinced that you will receive what is promised by our God, which is, this promise is also supported by the present and the future manifestations of this promise. Therefore, our faith is not a blind faith, but it is based on the promise of Yahuwah, our God. Yes, for he foretold to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of the things that will happen. So this faith is supported by our present condition. It shows us where we are today as we await for the future realization or manifestation of this promise that our God has made. And that is faith for us, being convinced that you will receive the promise by our God. And this faith is supported by our present condition, and also as we look forward to the future manifestation of this faith. So, but the question is this: what is it that was promised to our ancestors? What is it that Yahuwah promised that to ancestors on which we base our faith? What is it? So let's examine what is promised to our ancestors and to us. What is it that is promised to our ancestors and to us? In the book of Genesis chapter 15 verse 13 and 16, there it is written, Then he said to Abram, Say, know for certain that your offspring will be foreigners in a land not theirs, and that the people there will enslave them and afflict them for 400 years. But I will judge the nation they will serve, and after that they will go out with many goods. And as for you, you will go to your forefathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age, but they will return here in the 4th generation, because the era of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Yes, Abraham's chosen offspring, the Negro Israel, will be mistreated and made slaves to other peoples and nations. So they will be taken from their homeland, the promised land, and sold as slaves into lands not their own. But in their 4th generation or cycle in the promised land is when Yahuwah, their God, promised that he will give the promised land for the descendants of Abraham to inherit it forever. So therefore, our faith is based on this solid foundation of the promise made by our God, that he will give the descendants of Israel, the chosen descendant of Abraham, the promised land to inherit forever in our 4th generation. That is the basis of our faith. So, what are the past manifestation of the promise? What are the past manifestation of this promise? Yahuwah said in the fourth generation is when we are going to inherit the promised land forever. So in the first generation, or in the first recycle of Israel in the promised land, Israel, the manifestation of the promise is that Israel came out from Egyptian slavery to inherit the promised land. According to the book of Exodus chapter 12 verse 33 to 42. Read it at your own time. That was the first generation of Israelites inheriting the promised land. The second generation of this promise of Israel and the manifestation of the promise is that Israel returned from Babylon captivity after serving 70 years slavery or captivity in Babylon. They returned to the promised land to inherit it for a second generation. The third generation or recycle of Israelites in the promised land and manifestation of this same promise is that Israel returned from the Grecian slavery to inherit the promised land for the third generation. You can read about that in the book of Joel chapter 3 verse 3 to 7. The fourth generation of Israel and manifestation of the promise will be the exodus from among the nations where God scattered the descendants of Israel back to the promised land to inherit it for the fourth generation. That will be the fourth cycle of Israel returning back to the promised land to inherit it forever. So our faith is based on this promise that Yahuwah made to Abraham, our ancestor, that Israel will go through generations or cycles of manifestation in the promised land. But it's during the fourth generation of the descendants of Abraham in the promised land is when they will inherit the land forever. That is where our faith is rooted or based on. This is faith. So the present manifestation of our faith, at present day, Israel descendants are serving the 2 days equals to 2,000 years recommended punishment by our God because of our errors. In the book of Hosea chapter 5 verse 14 to 15, there it is written, Yahuwah said, I will be like a young lion to Ephraim, and like a strong lion to the house of Judah. Say, I myself will tear to pieces and go away. I will carry them off, and no one will rescue them. I will go away and return to my place until they bear the consequences of their guilt. And then they will seek my favor. When they are in distress, they will seek me. So Yahuwah said he's going to go away, leave Israel alone, until Israel bear the consequences of their error, or punishment for our error. Then we will seek him. So, in the book of Hosea chapter 6 verse 1 to 2, there is written, Come and let us return to Yahuwah, for he has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He struck us, but he will bind our wounds. He will revive us after 2 days, and on the third day he will raise us up, and we will live before him. So yes, at present, the descendants of Israel is going through this 2,000 years recommended punishment because of our error. Yes, Yahuwah says he's going to strike Israel for 2 days. But in the book of 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8, there it is written. Peter reminded us of this. He says, however, do not let this escape your notice, beloved ones, that one day is with Yahuwah as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So these 2 days will become 2,000 years punishment for all Israel. So this 2,000 years punishment and judgment will be completed before the 4th generation or cycle of Israel will return to the promised land, the kingdom of the God of heaven, to inherit it forever. So we have to finish this 2,000 years punishment before we can return for the 4th generation of the people of Israel in the promised land to inherit the land forever. So our faith is based on this promise of our God to give the land, the promised land, to the descendants of Abraham to inherit in our 4th generation or recycle in the promised land. The book of Matthew chapter 7 verse 20 to 21, there is written, our Messiah revealed this. He said, really then, by their fruits you will recognize these men. So not everyone saying to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of the heavens, but only the ones doing the will of my Father in the heavens will. So not everybody calling God, Lord, Lord, or God, God, will return to inherit the kingdom of heaven. It's only those, the people serving the will of God. And what is the will of God? Is the punishment that he imposed on the descendants of Israel, the people that he is dealing with. They are the ones that the kingdom territory was meant for. They are the ones that will return to inherit the kingdom in their 4th generation forever. So this is where our faith is based on. God's promise that he has made to our ancestors, which he will fulfill at the appointed time. So what is the future manifestation of our faith? Well, the future manifestation is this. When is the time for the 4th generation or the cycle of Israel in the promised land? The chosen ones will return back to the promised land, the kingdom territory of our God, as he has promised, to inherit it forever. In the book of Genesis chapter 15 verse 16, the promise is this. Yahuwah said to Abram, but they will return here in their 4th generation, because the era of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So it is during the 4th generation that Israel, the descendant of Israel, will return back to the promised land to inherit it forever. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 36 verse 7 to 8, there it is written, therefore this is what the sovereign Lord Yahuwah says, I myself raise my hand in an oath that the surrounding nations themselves will bear their own shame. But you, O mountain of Israel, will produce branches and bear your fruitage for my people Israel, for they will soon return. So Yahuwah promised that his people Israel will soon return to the promised land to inherit it forever during their 4th generation or the 4th recycle of Israel in the promised land. But the surrounding nations will also bear their own shame. Yes, this is the basis of our faith, the descendants of Abraham, that Yahuwah will fulfill his promise in our fourth generation to bring the chosen ones back to the kingdom territory to inherit it forever. That is the basis of our faith. And that promise has a future manifestation because our God promised it. Concerning the future manifestation of our faith, in the book of Zechariah chapter 8 verse 1 to 8 is written, "The word of Yahuwah of armies again came saying, This is what Yahuwah of armies says, I will be zealous for Zion with a great zeal, and with a great wrath I will be zealous for her. This is what Yahuwah says, I will return to Zion and reside in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be called the city of truth, the mountain of Yahuwah of armies, the holy mountain. This is what Yahuwah of armies says. Old men and women will again sit in public squares of Jerusalem, each with his staff in his hands because of his great age. And the public squares of the cities will be filled with boys and girls playing there. This is what Yahuwah says, Yahuwah of armies says. Although it may seem too difficult for the remaining ones of these people in those days, should it seem too difficult also for me? Declares Yahuwah of armies. So this is what Yahuwah of armies says. Here I am saving my people from the lands of the east and from the lands of the west, and I will bring them in, and they will reside in Jerusalem, and they will become my people, and I will become their God in truth and in righteousness. So yes, Yahuwah promised that he too will return back to Zion, and he will bring back his people to inherit Jerusalem, his holy mountain, just like he promised to Abraham that in the fourth generation is when they will return and inherit the land forever. So Jerusalem, the streets of Jerusalem will once again be filled with his people, with great age and children playing in the streets. This is the basis of our faith, that Yahuwah will fulfill his promise to Abraham in our fourth generation in the promised land. Yes, Yahuwah God will return and will gather his chosen ones and chosen race to serve him back to the promised land, the kingdom of our God. But the question is, how will he do this? How will he gather back his chosen ones from the east and west back to the promised land for the fourth generation? In the book of Matthew chapter 24 verse 29 to 31, there is written, Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the heavens, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will be themselves in grief, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his chosen ones together from the four winds from one extremity of the heavens to the other extremity. Yes, as soon as our punishment time among the nations is over, as soon as the time given to the Gentile nations to trample Jerusalem ends, Yahushua, our leader and king, will return with the angels and the chariots of our God to gather his chosen ones back to the promised land and kingdom of our God for our fourth regeneration. So as soon as our 2,000 years punishment comes to an end, as soon as the time given to the Gentile nations to trample Jerusalem comes to its end, Yahuwah will send his Son with the angels and the chariots of our God, and they will come and gather back his chosen ones from one extremity of the earth to the other extremity, back to the promised land for our fourth regeneration. That is the basis of our faith and the future manifestation of our faith. So what is the evident demonstration of our faith? Well, in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 verse 13 to 16, there is written, "In faith all these died, although they did not receive the fulfillment of the promise, but they saw them from a distance and welcomed them and publicly declared that they were foreigners and temporary residents in the land. For those who speak in such a way make it evidence that they are earnestly seeking a place of their own. And yet, if they had kept remembering the place from which they had departed, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they are reaching out for a better place, that is one belonging to heaven. Therefore God is not ashamed of them to be called on as their God, for he has prepared a city for them." Yes, demonstration of our faith. Though many of our forefathers who have hold on to this faith, they knew that the restoration of God's kingdom will not take place until the fourth cycle of Israel in the promised land. But they saw it afar off, in a distance. They understood what God is doing. That it is in the fourth generation, when God will give the land, the territory that he promised to Abraham to inherit and his descendants to inherit. In the fourth generation is when we will inherit the promised land forever. So that is their faith. They know about it. They were aware of it. They consider themselves strangers in the foreign lands where they were dwelling, because they are looking forward to a better city, a better place of their own. For God promised to give the land to the descendants of Israel in their fourth regeneration, to inherit the land forever. Yes, today, true Hebrew descendants of Abraham who has this faith in them conduct and consider themselves as foreigners among the nations where we were scattered. So we are seeking and waiting for a better place according to the promise of our God. We are waiting until the time for our fourth regeneration in the promised land. Yes, for our fourth regeneration, where we are to serve and build up the kingdom of our God on earth That is the hope of all true descendants of Abraham. For our faith is based on the promise that Yahuwah made to Abraham. That is in the fourth regeneration, or in the fourth cycle of descendants of Abraham in the promised land is when we are going to inherit the land forever and build up the kingdom of our God. That is the basis of our faith, on the promise of our God that he made to Abraham and to our ancestors of what he's doing regarding the people of Israel. So this is our faith. The book of John chapter 3 verse 16 to 18, there is written, "For God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone exercising faith in him might not be destroyed but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world for him to judge the world, but for the world to be saved through him. Whoever exercises faith in him is not to be judged. Whoever does not exercise faith has been judged already, because he has not exercised faith in the name of the only begotten Son of God." So yes, God loved the world of Israel so much that he gave us his only begotten Son. And his Son came and made clear what our God is doing with us. And we must exercise faith in what our God is doing. And we must exercise faith in the promise that he has made to our ancestor Abraham. For it is until the fourth generation that the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, will inherit the promised land forever. So those who believe on this, has faith on these promises, are not to be judged. But those who have no faith in this promise has been judged already. So this is our faith. It is based on the promise of our God to our ancestor Abraham, that the chosen descendants of Abraham will return for the fourth regeneration of the people of Israel in the land that God promised Israel. So we must have faith in the promise of our God. We must have faith in Yahuwah, in Yahushua, the Son of Yahuwah. We must have faith in Yahushua, the Son that Yahuwah sent to Israel, if we must be saved and have everlasting life. We must have faith in the promise that God has made. And we must have faith in his Son that he sent to Israel. For that Son is the one that will gather Israel back together during the time for our fourth regeneration in the promised land. So if you will return to the promised kingdom of our God, if you are going to return to the promised land to serve him, so you must build your faith on the promise of our God and on his Son, the means of our salvation. So if you must return for this fourth regeneration of the descendants of Abraham in the promised land, you must have faith in our God and in the promise that he has made. And that is to give to the descendants of Israel the promised land to inherit forever in our fourth regeneration. In our fourth generation. We must have faith in the Son of God, who is the means for regathering the people of Israel back to the promised land. This is the basis of our faith. So wake up with this. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 5 to 7, there it is written, "Now the one who prepared us for this very thing is God, so who gave us the Spirit as a token of what is to come. So we are always good. We are always of good courage, and know that while we have our home in this body, we are absent from the Lord, for we are walking by faith and not by sight." What Paul is saying is this, that God prepared us, the chosen race, to inherit the promised land forever by giving us His Spirit as a manifestation of what is to come. So while we have our home or our residence in the body or in the places where we are scattered, some of you are scattered to Africa, some of you are scattered to Americas, to the islands, to the Europeans, to Asian countries. Wherever you have your body where you are scattered, that you now call your home. So while we are what? Absent in the body. So while we have our homes or residence in the body of places where we are scattered, so we are absent from the Lord our God. But the question is, why are we absent from the Lord our God? Because we are scattered. In the book of Hosea chapter 5 verse 14 to 15, there is written, "For I will become like a young lion to Ephraim, and like a strong lion to the house of Judah. I myself will tear to pieces and go away. I will carry them off, and no one will rescue them. I will go away and return to my place until they bear consequences of their guilt, and then they will seek for my favor. When they are in distress, they will seek me." So then we walk by faith on the promise of our God, and not by what we see at the present. Because at the present, Abraham's chosen descendants, the Negro, is scattered among the nations, serving the imposed punishment until it ends. It is after this punishment ends is when we will return to inherit the promise of our God. And that is when we will return to be with our God, Yahuwah, and His Son, Yahushua, will rule as King over the house of Israel forever. So this is the basis of our faith, and this is faith. It is based on the promise of our God. It has a it has a present manifestation. It has a past manifestation. It has a present manifestation. And it has a future manifestation. So our faith is based on the promise of our God, which cannot and will never fail. So this is it. This is the basis of our faith. Build your faith on the promise of God, not on the false promises, on false faith given to you by our enemies. For many of you have been given the faith, thinking that someday when you die, you are going to heaven. The promise is that we are going to return back to the promised land in our fourth generation to inherit the promised land forever. That is the solid foundation for our faith. not that we are going to heaven. So this is it. Build your faith, because the time for the fourth generation is at hand. Until I come to you next time, thank you, and keep building your faith on the sure foundation that will never fail.